The village of endless laughter. Long ago, nestled between the warm arms of two emerald hills, there lived a village called Eziama. It was a place where the river sang louder than the people, and the trees leaned in to listen. The sun always lingered a little longer over Eziama, as if it too could not bear to leave the beauty of it behind. The people of Eziama lived simple but rich lives. They woke each morning to the songs of the weaver birds and fell asleep under the lullabies of the crickets. They tilled their soil, fished the rivers, and wove colorful cloths that fluttered like captured rainbows on every breeze. Music was the breath of Eziama. On any given day, the drummers in the center of the village would beat out a rhythm that echoed through the trees, and the villagers would answer, with claps, songs, and endless, ringing laughter. It was said that the gods of the river and forest had blessed Eziama. No child went hungry, no elder went cold. The yam harvests were fat and sweet. The river steamed with fish so plentiful that even the lazy could eat well. Sickness was rare, and disputes were few. Presiding over all of this joy was a man as old as the tallest Iroko tree, Papa Olumo. His beard, white and thick as cotton, reached down to his chest. His back was bent, but his eyes, those eyes, burned with the clarity of a midday sun. Papa Olumo was not a chief, nor a warrior. He held no official title, but everyone knew that Eziama thrived because of him. Some whispered that he spoke to the river spirits. Others claimed he carried the songs of the ancestors in the folds of his skin. Children were told to seek his blessing before beginning anything important, and even the proudest young warriors bowed their heads in his presence. And so, year after year, laughter floated like perfume through the air of Eziama. The drum spoke. The feet danced. The hearts were light. But blessings, when taken for granted, curdled into curses. It began with the animals. First, the village goats, gone. Then the chickens. Then, mysteriously, even the sleek river fish seemed to vanish. No one could explain it. The old men of the river shook their heads, the women who tended the gardens frowned at empty nets. Then the river itself shrank. It no longer sang against the stones. Its voice became a whisper, and then a whimper. Then the harvest failed. The once rich yams came up thin and bitter. The maize fell sick in the fields. Children cried in the mornings from hunger, and the mothers cried at night for shame. Fear settled over Eziama like a dark cloud. And in fear, people looked for someone to blame. Their eyes turned, slowly, to Papa Olumo. It was the priestess of the temple, Mama Adana, who first spoke aloud the whispers that had already begun to call around the village like smoke. "He is too old," she said one evening at the gathering place. "Too secretive. Too powerful. Perhaps he has angered the gods. Perhaps he has kept the blessings for himself and left us with the bones." Her words took root in frightened hearts. Was it not true that Papa Olumo spent long hours alone, wandering near the sacred riverbanks where others dared not go? Was it not true that no one knew the full measure of the things he carried in the old calabash strapped to his back? The village murmured the way dry leaves murmur before a fire. And then, in the middle of a bitter night when the moon was hidden and the stars were too frightened to shine, the decision was made. Papa Olumo must die. The young warriors came for him at dawn, their faces painted with ash to hide their shame. He did not resist. When they dragged him to the center of the village, he stood tall, despite the stoop of his old bones, and looked each of them in the eye. Even as the mothers hid their faces, even as the children wept behind their hands, even as the drums that once sang for joy now beat a slow, mournful rhythm. They bound his hands with thorny vines. They led him out of the village and across the hills to the cursed swamp, an ancient place where the earth itself seemed to bleed black water. No one who entered the swamp returned. At the edge, Papa Olumo turned back to the gathered villagers. His voice, though cracked with age, was strong enough to carry across the silent fields. "You do not understand what you have done," he said. Your laughter shall rot. The wind rose and stirred his robe. Your breath shall freeze. The trees groaned, though no one touched them. Until blood returns to blood. With that, they cast him into the swamp. His body disappeared into the mist like a stone into a bottomless well. The villagers stood there for a long moment, unsure, unsteady, as if the very earth shifted under their feet. Finally, the priestess raised her arms and cried out, "The curse is lifted. Eziama is saved." And the people tried, oh, how they tried, to believe her. That night, they lit fires and danced in a weary attempt at celebration. The drums beat, but they sounded hollow. The laughter rang out, but it cracked like dry wood. And high above them, hidden among the whispering trees, unseen eyes watched. Waiting the first night of horror. For a single day, Eziama danced. Smoke from roasting fires filled the air, and the people tried to shake off the heavy fear that had gripped them for so long. They sang and drummed and cheered, proclaiming that their curse had been lifted, that the gods would bless them once again. Papa Olumo is gone, they told themselves. The gods are satisfied. But in the pit of every heart, there lurked an unease, a small, gnawing dread that no song could drown. And when the sun dipped below the western hills that evening, the winds changed. The air grew cold, heavy, sharp as broken glass. Dogs whimpered and refused to leave their masters' doorsteps. Chickens crowded together in fearful silence. Even the insects that usually sang the night into being were quiet. The elders said it was only the land settling after a great evil had been expelled. Sleep, they said, and tomorrow we shall see new blessings. So the people of Eziama slept. Or at least, they tried. It began as a whisper, an eerie, high-pitched hum that floated above the village like mist. A sound that was not wind, not water, not anything of the earth. And then the wailing began. A single, soul-twisting cry, stretched long and broken, as though the night itself were being torn in two. The bravest among them crept to their doorways, peeking through the cracks. What they saw would haunt the village for generations to come. Floating just above the ground, moving without steps or wings, was a head. A human head, yet no human lived in it anymore. Its eyes were vast, empty, and blindingly white, like moons torn from the heavens. Its mouth hung open, frozen mid-scream, exposing blackened teeth. Its hair, once thick and dark, now hung in rotting, stinking clumps. The head drifted, silent as death, following an invisible trail. Some said it haunted the scent of blood. Others said it was drawn to guilt, as a mosquito is drawn to a fevered body. It passed by house after house, its ghastly wail echoing off the mud walls, making grown men drop to their knees and sob. And then, without warning, it slipped into the small hut of a poor fisherman named Obika. There, sleeping on a woven mat, was his youngest daughter, Amoka, only 6 years old. The villagers heard no struggle, no cries. Only the long, drawn-out silence after the head entered. When the fishermen, gathering their courage, burst into Obika's home at dawn, they found her. Amoka lay on her mat, untouched by any weapon. But her eyes were open, wide, glassy, staring at something no one else could see. Her mouth was stretched in a scream so pure, so full of terror, that even in death it refused to close. The village wept that morning. Women tore their clothes. Men beat their chests. The drums, which once sang songs of life, now pounded a slow, heavy rhythm, the drums of mourning. And thus, a new ritual was born. Every evening, as the sky bruised into darkness, the drums of mourning began to beat. 3 slow beats. A long pause. 3 more. A summons for everyone to hide within their homes, lock their doors, and whisper prayers to any god who still cared to listen. The elders, desperate to reclaim control, called for rituals. They slaughtered goats and painted their blood on doorposts. They burned incense until the whole village choked. They sang the old songs of protection, the ones their grandparents had taught them and they had long forgotten. Nothing worked. Every night, without fail, the floating head returned. Sometimes it only passed by, trailing its awful stench. Other times, it would pause outside a door, hovering, moaning, as if deciding. And once too many, it chose. Another child gone. Then a mother. Then a young warrior who had been among those who tied Papa Olumo's hands. Each death left the village hollower, like a tree slowly eaten from within by termites. Fear no longer merely visited Eziama. It had built a house there, and taken root in every corner. Families began to turn on each other, whispering accusations behind closed doors. It is you it wants? No, it is you who carries the guilt. The laughter that once gave Eziama its name had rotted into cold silence, just as Papa Olumo had warned. And somewhere, deep in the cursed swamp beyond the hills, the mist thickened. And something within it stirred. Watching. Waiting, the curse tightens. The seasons changed. The great rains came and went. The fiery suns of the dry moon scorched the land. But Eziama knew no peace. The floating head did not weaken with time. It grew stronger. Hungrier. At first, it had only come at night, hidden under the veil of darkness. Now, it slithered into the village even before the last light of the sun dipped behind the hills. Long purple shadows would stretch across the ground, and with them came the sharp, bitter cold of the ghost breath. No longer content with only human victims, the curse now poisoned the very lifeblood of Eziama. The river, once the village's proud blessing, shriveled to a snake-thin trickle. The yams and cassava, once bursting with life, turned to dry, cracked husks in the earth. Goats and chickens, when they were born at all, came into the world twisted and still, their eyes already frozen shut, their small bodies stiff as wood. The people of Eziama, once vibrant and proud, began to fade. Children were chained inside their huts at dusk, iron bands around their ankles, desperate parents whispering old spells and crying softly in the corners. Women no longer sang while grinding grain. Men no longer laughed over palm wine beneath the iroko trees. The air itself seemed heavy with mourning, as if even the sky had turned its face away from the village. Still, the elders said, endure. Pray. Sacrifice. But prayers turned to dust in the mouth. And sacrifices only fed the hunger of the curse. One dusk, as the drums of mourning began to beat their sorrowful rhythm, a young woman named Ifunanya stood in the village square. She was no elder, no priestess, only a weaver's daughter. But her heart burned brighter than her fear. We cannot live like this, she cried out, her voice sharp against the settling gloom. I will go to the swamp. I will find what stirs this evil and end it. The villagers, huddled behind doorways, watched her with hollow eyes. Some shook their heads. Some wept silently. But no one stopped her. Not out of bravery. But because hope had already died in them. Ifunanya wrapped herself in a red cloth and tied protective charms around her waist. She carried a lantern of fireflies in one hand and a long iron spear in the other. The path to the cursed swamp was lined with dead trees, their twisted branches clawing at the sky. The deeper she went, the colder it became, so cold that her breath came in puffs of mist, and the very grass beneath her feet turned white and brittle. In the thick heart of the swamp, the mist thickened into walls. The ground paused beneath her, as if breathing. Then she saw it. Not just the head this time. No. A body now floated behind it, thin and torn, like a rotten sack filled with bones. Eyes still wide and unblinking, mouth still frozen in that eternal scream. And wrapped around its neck, black and slimy as oil, was a rope of swamp vine. The same vine the villagers had used to bind Papa Olumo's hands when they dragged him to his death. The moment the head turned its gaze toward her, the very air turned to ice. Ifunanya ran. The ground split beneath her feet. The mist clawed at her face. The cold gripped her skin like iron hooks. By the time she stumbled back into Eziama's gates, her lantern long lost and her spear shattered, her skin was blistered with frost. Her hair had turned brittle and white as salt. She collapsed, burning with fever. For 3 days and 3 nights, she lay on a mat, hovering between life and death, muttering broken words about the swamp, about vines, about eyes that never closed. The villagers gathered around her, shivering in terror. If even the brave could not defeat the curse, if even the pure could not withstand its breath, what hope was left for the rest of them? Some tried to flee. They packed bundles of food, carried their crying children on their backs, and slipped into the forest under the light of the morning moon. But the curse was not a chain tied to the land. It was tied to their souls. The ones who fled were found by hunters days later. Bodies stiff and cold, caught in death. Eyes wide and screaming into the sky. Faces frozen in the same terror they had carried in their hearts. The truth, undeniable now, spread through Eziama like sickness. You cannot run from guilt. It is a flame that follows you into the deepest woods. It is a blade that cuts even in your dreams. It is a shadow stitched into your very breath. And in the cursed swamp beyond the hills, Papa Olumo's spirit stirred once more. His voice rose on the cold mist, whispering, "Blood must return to blood." The oracle of the broken paths. When the fevered whispers of Ifunanya faded into silence, the village council of Eziama knew they had no time left. The old ways had failed. The river gods had turned their faces. The harvest spirits were deaf to their cries. And so, trembling under the weight of their own doom, they agreed to a final, desperate act. They would seek out Mother Nena, the oracle of the broken paths. It was said that Mother Nena had been born blind, yet she saw more than any living soul. She lived alone deep within the mangrove forest. A place where the trees whispered forgotten names, and the waters tasted of old bones. No one sought her without paying a price. Some never returned. Still, a small party of elders, led by the sorrowful chief Odigui, gathered their courage. With offerings of kola nuts, goat blood, and woven cloth, they set off into the choking green darkness. The journey itself was a trial. First came the River of Teeth, a cursed stream where phantom crocodiles snapped from under invisible waters. The villagers bled from torn cuts and wept as they dragged themselves across slick stones, their offerings nearly lost to the current. Then came the Forest of Whispers, towering trees that murmured with the voices of the dead. At night, as they huddled around dying fires, unseen hands tugged at their feet, unseen mouths breathed cold promises into their ears. By the time they reached the clearing where Mother Nena's hut rotted atop stilts of black wood, only 3 remained. The others had been swallowed by the mangroves, claimed by vines, or simply vanished into the mist. Mother Nena awaited them. She sat hunched in the shadows, her skin a map of wrinkles, her milky white eyes staring straight through them. Her voice was like the sigh of a dying river. "You come not for wisdom," she rasped, "but for escape." The chief fell to his knees, bowing until his forehead touched the muddy earth. "Mother, the curse kills us." The laughter has turned to screams. "The air is cold with death. We beg you, tell us what must be done." Mother Nena's bony fingers traced patterns in the dirt. For a long, terrible silence, she said nothing. Finally, she spoke. "The bond was broken with blood unjustly shed," she said. "And only through blood and penance can it be mended." The villagers dared not breathe. 3 must journey to the swamp of souls, Mother Nena continued, her blind eyes flashing with something deeper than sight, to where Papa Olumo's bones rot and the ancestral drum lies buried in the mud. The drum is the breath of the village. Its beat tied the laughter to the land. Its silence chained the curse to your souls. The chief shivered. "Who shall go?" he asked. Mother Nena smiled, a terrible, broken smile. "Those who carry the heaviest guilt," she said. They must volunteer of their own will. They must walk the broken paths without deceit. But beware, she added, voice dropping to a whisper, for in the swamp of souls, your guilt will rise before you, wearing flesh. It will speak with the mouths you silenced. It will bleed with the wounds you dealt. Face it, and you may yet live. Fail, and you will join the swamp, forever screaming under its waters. The villagers wept at her feet, for they knew the weight of their sins. And when they returned to Eziama, battered and hollow-eyed, the drums of mourning beat a slower, heavier rhythm. A summoning. 3 were chosen. Ifunanya, though still frail from her encounter, volunteered first. Her guilt was fierce and buried, something even she had never dared speak aloud. Obina, the blacksmith, who had made the vines that bound Papa Olumo's hands. He had wept every night since, but never dared to confess. And Adana, daughter of an elder, who had whispered the first fearful lie into the ears of the villagers, sparking the fire that led to Papa Olumo's death. Each bore a secret shame that gnawed at them like rats in the dark. At dawn, they stood before the village gates, wrapped in red cloths, each holding a small token of the life they hoped to reclaim. A bead necklace. A carving of a drum. A threadbare book of old songs. The people of Eziama did not cheer them. There was no joy left for that. Instead, the villagers turned their faces to the earth, ashamed to look upon the ones carrying their burden. With heads bowed and hearts heavy, the 3 stepped into the midst of the swamp, where the trees bent low and the waters waited. Behind them, the village listened to the fading sound of the drums of mourning, pounding like a dying heart. And in the far distance, rising from the cursed swamp, came a low, broken laughter. The sound of Papa Olumo's ghost remembering the betrayal. The path forward was written now. Blood must return to blood. Into the swamp of souls. The mist of the swamp swallowed them whole. Ifunanya, her brother Obina, and old man Ikin took their first steps beyond the living world, their feet sinking into cold, wet mud that clutched at their ankles like dead hands. The sky above them was no longer blue or grey, but a sickly shade of bruised purple, heavy with the taste of rot and old sour. There was no path. Only the sound of their own shuddering breath, and the whispering vines that seemed to slither from tree to tree, calling their names. Ifunanya. Obina. Ikin. The swamp was not just a place, it was alive with the spirits of regret. And it remembered. At first, the hallucinations were small. A flicker of movement in the mist. A laughing voice from behind a twisted mangrove tree. The scent of burning yams, the kind Ifunanya and her sister used to share under the moonlight. But as they pressed deeper, the swamp tightened around them, and the memories grew teeth. Ifunanya's trial. One night, or was it still day? Time had no meaning there. Ifunanya stumbled into a clearing where the mist parted to reveal a terrible sight. There, kneeling in the mud, was her younger sister, Amora. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow. Why did you leave me, Ifunanya? The ghost whispered. You promised to protect me, but you chose yourself. Ifunanya fell to her knees, the weight of her guilt pressing her down like a great stone. Tears streamed down her face. She remembered it all too clearly. The night raiders came, and she had hidden in the granary while Amora had been taken. Ifunanya had survived. Her sister had not. Forgive me, she sobbed, reaching out with shaking hands. Forgive me, Amora. The ghost leaned forward, cold hands pressing against Ifunanya's chest. For a terrible moment, Ifunanya thought she would be dragged under. But instead, she did something she had never done, not even to herself. She spoke the truth aloud. I was afraid. I was selfish. I chose myself. I carry that shame, and I will never let it go. The ghost smiled, sad and soft, and dissolved into the mist. Ifunanya staggered to her feet, stronger. Obina's trial. Obina, meanwhile, found himself lost in a thicket where the trees twisted into cruel shapes. Everywhere he looked, he saw the faces of his hunting brothers, men he had once sworn to protect. They had been ambushed by beasts years ago. Obinna had fled into the woods, leaving them to their deaths. He had told the village they fought bravely to the last. But he knew the truth. Now the beasts surrounded him again, black shapes with gnashing teeth. "Run, coward," they hissed. "Save yourself again." Obinna trembled, every instinct screaming to flee. But then he heard Ifunanya's voice, distant but clear. "Face it, brother. Or be trapped forever." With a cry that tore his throat raw, Obinna stood his ground. "I ran," he shouted into the gnashing dark. "I abandoned them. I am a coward." The beast paused. The swamp listened. And then the creatures dissolved into smoke, leaving Obinna panting but alive. Ikin's trial. Old man Ikin's trial was the hardest. He found himself before a mud altar where Papa Olumo knelt, hands bound, eyes kind and sad. The memory was so vivid that Ikin dropped to his knees, sobbing. "Strike him down, Ikin," the swamp hissed. "Just as you did before." His own hand, the same hand that had struck the first blow against Papa Olumo, rose of its own will, fingers stiff and cracking. "Forgive me," Ikin mourned. Papa Olumo's ghost only gazed at him, silent and waiting. Ikin understood then, it was not forgiveness he needed. It was acknowledgement. "I killed you because I was weak," Ikin said through gritted teeth. "I feared what I could not understand. I chose cruelty over faith." He dropped the imaginary weapon from his hand and bowed until his forehead touched the foul earth. The ghost of Papa Olumo placed a phantom hand on his head and vanished into mist. Battered, broken, but still breathing, the three reached the heart of the swamp. There, beneath a dead tree twisted into the shape of a screaming man, they found it. The ancestral drum. Its surface was cracked and soaked with years of swamp water, but it still pulsed faintly with a heartbeat that was not its own. Around it, the water bubbled as if unseen things stirred below. Ifunanya reached for the drum, but when she touched it, a chill ran through her body. It was not enough to possess it. They had to awaken it. They had to drum not with fear, not with lies, but with truth. Obinna lifted his trembling hands. Ikin, weeping, placed his palm on the cracked hide. And together, led by Ifunanya's steady voice, they began to drum. A slow, painful rhythm of confession. A song of their sins. A hymn of sorrow and longing for redemption. The swamp screamed. The waters churned. And from the mist rose not a monster, but a towering figure wrapped in blue light, Papa Olumo, smiling, "Ho." He raised his hand. "The bond is mended," he said, voice deep as thunder, soft as the falling rain. And with that, the swamp began to recede. The dead trees groaned and fell. The waters cleared. The laughter, the cursed, endless laughter that had once haunted Eziama, was carried away by a cool, clean wind. The three survivors stumbled home, bearing the ancestral drum between them. Behind them, the swamp of souls slept once more. But its whispers had not vanished entirely. They had simply grown quiet, waiting, should the village ever again forget the price of blood and betrayal. In Eziama, the bells tolled not for mourning, but for rebirth, the last bit of the curse. They returned to Eziama like wraiths, thin, hollow-eyed, and forever changed. The villagers gathered under the great old banyan tree, whose thick roots clawed into the earth like ancient hands. It was here that Papa Olumo had once taught the people of Eziama the songs of the ancestors, before fear and envy poisoned their hearts. The ancestral drum was placed at the base of the tree, where its cracked hide pulsed faintly under the silver light of a weeping moon. The villagers knelt in a wide circle. The drums of mourning, which for so long had signaled fear and hiding, were silent now. Only one drum would speak this night, the drum of truth. The final ritual. Ifunanya, Obinna, and Ikin sat before the drum. Their hands hovered above it, trembling. Then, as one, they began to beat. A slow, broken rhythm, one that spoke not of triumph, but of sorrow. Each strike of the drum was a confession. Each vibration, a wound reopened. The sound spread like smoke through the village, rattling the walls, shaking the leaves of the ancient trees. And in the distance, rising over the roofs of the huts, came the sound everyone feared. The wail of the floating head. It came, gliding low and fast, trailing rotted hair and weeping eyes. Its mouth was a pit of despair, its breath cold enough to turn the air to frost. The villagers whimpered and clung to each other, but Ifunanya did not flinch. She beat the drum harder. She poured her shame, her grief, her love into every note. The spirit of Papa Olumo appeared from the mist, at first monstrous, twisted and wrong, eyes wild, teeth bared. The villagers gasped and some even fled to the edge of the clearing. But the drumbeat did not stop. With every strike, the monstrous spirit wavered. Its shape blurred. The sharpness of its teeth softened into a sad, weary smile. The claws became human hands, trembling with pain. Papa Olumo stood there at last, no longer a creature of terror, but a man of sorrow, carrying the weight of betrayal on his broad shoulders. The confession. One by one, the villagers stepped forward. The blacksmith, who had lied to save his pride. The midwife, who had stayed silent when her voice could have saved a life. The hunter, who had cursed Olumo's crops in secret. The widow, who had whispered poison into the ears of her neighbors. Each knelt before the ancestral drum. Each spoke their sin aloud, their voices cracking, their tears soaking the earth. Forgive me, Papa Olumo. Forgive us, our ancestors. Forgive me, Eziama. The banyan tree seemed to drink in their words, its leaves trembling as if in grief. Papa Olumo's spirit listened. And with every confession, he grew brighter, less a figure of judgment, more a beacon of hope. The final beat. Ifunanya's arms ached. Her heart felt raw. But she lifted her hands high one last time, and with a cry from deep within her soul, she struck the ancestral drum with all the force of her love, her grief, and her truth. The sound that rang out was not a beat, but a roar, a deep thunder that shook the earth and echoed into the heavens. The floating head screamed, a terrible, shuddering wail, and then shattered into smoke, carried away on the night wind. Papa Olumo smiled once more, softly, gently, and then he, too, faded into the stars. The curse was broken. Aftermath. Eziama was never the same. The laughter that once rang so easily through the dusty streets returned, but it came slowly, cautiously, as if the very earth remembered the blood it had drunk. Children played once again beneath the banyan tree, but always under the watchful eyes of the elders, who no longer ruled with pride, but with humility. Some nights, the wind would carry the faint sound of drum beats, not of fear, but of remembrance. Ifunanya was chosen as the new guardian, not through magic, not through power, but because she had proven herself willing to face truth, no matter how painful. She taught the children the old songs. She told them the true stories of Eziama, not just the victories, but the betrayals too. She made them promise never to bury guilt in silence, where it could rot into curses. And so, the village lived on. Not perfect, but honest.